I was just saying, I think I met Loss right before the pandemic, and I knew you were a writer and a poet. And I think you told me you were working on this book at the time. I didn't know what to expect. But I'll say Loss is a multilingual. Let's see how Loss writes this. Loss Pequeño Glazier is a multilingual woodland poet. Who has spent years writing, teaching, and roving heart-spirit landscapes in Berkeley, Paris, India, Mexico, Cuba, Buffalo, and now the Blue Ridge, Southern Appalachians. His works include Luna Lanera, poems Andaluz, Anatman, Pumpkin Seed, Algorithm, and Digital Poetics, the making of Ecopoetry. Loss lives and writes in the vitalizing biodiversity of the Smoky Mountains. He's a professor emeritus of media studies at SUNY Buffalo, New York, and also has been the director of the Electronic Poetry Center, which I looked at some stuff online today, and that was a really interesting project. Maybe you can say more about that later. He's worked also as artistic director of poetry and dance, different various and interesting career paths that you've been on, multi-paths, it seems like. So this book is what we'll be talking about today, Transparent Mountain, which is just really, I was just absolutely smitten by this book as soon as I encountered it and held it in my hands and opened it up and began to read it. It's the kind of stuff I love. And you have lived in so many different places, reading your bio and history of your life. And you're here in Cowee.
No better place to be.
Yeah. So how Cowee? How did you end up in this wonderful, storied place?
Well, I look at all the places I've been as kind of like blazes along a trail. And some of those blazes were like stupas in the Himalayas, and some were like Mount Fuji or different places that I went hiking when I was younger, like Tuolumne Meadows in the Sierras. Before the crowds came, because crowds can't have come everywhere. And in the Himalayas, even I was shocked because when I hiked up there near Annapurna, you walked 60 miles up. You left the road and you walked 60 miles up. And then you always think, wow, what would it be nice now? What would it be like now? I looked back and it was like, now they offer a service that a bus takes you up there and then a helicopter brings you back home. So it's like,
totally different place.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I think that's, I just ended up here because I just kept finding markers along the way. And then at a certain point, we first moved down here to Athens, and it was like really kind of too dark. And, you couldn't see this moon, so that blows that deal right away. So then I told my wife, all I want is a view of a mountain.
Yeah.
So she started looking around, and we came up to see a place here. And then the first place we saw, I walked out on the corner of the terrace and I saw the Transparent Mountain. And I just told the realtor I'd take it. Of course, didn't have water, didn't have a doorknob, it had a hole. And it was like full of insects. And the front door, the sliding door didn't change. So, and they said I could check out the deck if I wanted to, but be careful, I might fall off. But I saw the Transparent Mountain, so I just thought, this is where I need to be. So, like I think with your own house, we got to work.
Yeah. And we'll work until we're dead.
And I feel like in a certain way, it's a place I've always been.
Yeah.
Because I just remember really clearly when I was really small in Japan and I'd seeing Mount Fuji, and it looked like it was a rock floating in the sky where you get the mythological reference. And I told my dad, let's go climb that. And my dad said, are you crazy? We don't speak Japanese. So, and then And then other places along the way. Oh yeah, then when I was a little older as a child, I lived in El Paso, Texas, and there was just unlimited desert. But there's Mount Franklin there, which is interesting because Franklin's here too. But Mount Franklin, which is like the southernmost mountain in the Rockies. So I spent all my free time up in the mountain, up in the Rockies, I mean, in the Mount Franklin, it's very dry. And so then, so I just think all those mountain experiences sort of just made it natural. When I got here, then I found out I could live here. I never want to leave.
Yeah, and it seems like the writing just kind of must have just poured out of you to write this.
Yeah, well,
I'm kind of digressing off of my path, but I'd rather be a little spontaneous about it. The term transparent mountain is so intriguing throughout the book, which is, of course, the title of the book. You use that term, as you describe seeing the transparent mountain, and then that becomes like this giant, I feel like, metaphor throughout the whole book. But it seems to have called you, because this is like a flood of language just kind of oozing out of this mountain behind us here.
So this is this would make sense, because the problem is if you don't know if you don't have some of the underpinnings, the text can get a little bit, it can go off in its own directions, which it actually sort of did to me. Hopefully we'll get to that point. Well, we will through method and through Bartram. So, so this is like what we were just talking about. My childhood, and this is page 9, so near the beginning. My childhood mind illuminated by mountains. On the western tine of the Trans-Pecos Triangle, beyond the Chisos, Huecos, Guadalupes, centipede-filled arroyos. First mine, best mine, child forays on billion-year-old stones. From a parched trance of spiny lizard-skinned desert, 7,000-foot Pico North Franklin cleaves a pinnacle on high Chihuahuan horizon. Parched peak of mountain on Precambrian ridges, a desert monolith implacably dominated euphoric cranial, imperial, cerebral sky. I invent words, align rocks as alien alphabets, edit graffiti on fences. 1 block from my house is endless desert. I roam dunes of tumbleweed, pitaya, clary cup, prickly pear, morning star cactus. Rattlesnakes hiss madly, jackrabbits bolt in confetti party bomb bursts. I see panting horned toads with wet, lovesick eyes. Hear coyotes entreat moonlit sand. The alpha male yip howls his territorial wail, peppered with the female's descant, yaps, barks, tremolos, short angel-headed hip hoots. By day, child's play to wander to Pico's parched base, where it skyrockets 3,000 feet skyward to loom the spine of a daunting fault-buckled behemoth. At day's end, it swallows the sun. That's get you a sense for the kind of the rhythm and engagement of the principal character in the book.
I would say so. And it just builds and builds and builds and builds. It feels like multiple crescendos throughout the book. I think about Bartram and mountains piled upon mountains. And with this, it was like language piled upon language. And adjectives and adjectives and adjectives used in ways that I'd never heard used before, I think. Or in many of these words that I wasn't even acquainted with, but for whatever rhythmic reason, they worked absolutely precisely within the poem. It's beautiful use of language.
I figured if the words are in the dictionary, they're fair game. And if they're not in the dictionary, I figure I can make them up.
Yeah, there are multiple passages that
I borrow from like Nahuatl and other languages to make words that fit in. Because interestingly, well, also I have some links to Mexico, but Mexico City, the dominant mountain is called Popocatépetl, which is a really nice word to like stick into the poem here and there. But a lovely coincidence is Popocatépetl means smoking mountain, which I just love the sort of like, play of, obviously ours isn't smoking the same way. It's just like a smoking place to be.
Let's see. So you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about biodiversity. This book, I think, just reeks biodiversity. You've done such an amazing job of, I think, just merging so many creatures that are in these mountains, and all the way down to almost the unicellular level, I would say, and all the way up to the giant mammalian level. But there's also this big cultural, natural, geological history that's woven into all of this. And so I couldn't help but wondering as I read this, what your process was for this exploration that you had to do, which I considered it to be just like monumental that you did so much at once with this book. Was there a point in when you arrived here in these mountains where you really just suddenly like something went off and you were just absorbed completely into learning everything you could? Because there's a lot of rich kind of information here about Cherokees and about Bartram and other explorers and place-based kind of knowledge and language of species, geology. Just it's a lot.
Yeah, and I feel like I had to learn everything I could, and it all goes back to the time that Africa and the Appalachians broke apart, because that just like disrupted the whole scene. So, which by the way, that's why the postcard you have in there is from Morocco, because that's the other half of the Smokies, It's just not the rainy half. It's the more like Saharan desert half. But I think it became more of a matter of, so if you imagine, and I like to say, for example, that every time you see a Carolina wren, if you're where you need to be sort of in your mind or whatever, it's that Carolina wren is like the first bird you've ever seen. Like that's what we lose through the process of, humanification, which is that you stop seeing things with wonder. So part of the process of really feeling the impact of what's here is to be able to see, to open your eyes again and to reposition yourself with your childlike wonder. And in order to do that, it actually is funny that seems not the method you take, but it takes a lot of discipline. So my day begins like in the 4 a.m. hour thereabouts, and then to spend time with the darkness and the world when it's tranquil, because it's all we've got left. When you have light pollution in the night and noise pollution is constant. I mean, not so much here in the mountains. We love the quiet here, but even so, the early morning hours, you don't have those impositions into your ability to just like be where you are. And I even say, like, in the early morning hours, you can even go back to where before television was invented, because there's not even television. Like, if you think about what television has done, it's like nobody talks to anyone anymore. Nobody like sits down, has dinner anymore. And then with the media age, you could be sitting next to somebody and they don't even look at you anymore, So it's a time before television was invented at 4:30 in the morning. And I feel I can say that because if that James Webb telescope can see 13 billion years in the past, I can certainly see a couple of hundred years in the past looking out my deck in the total darkness. And besides, there's plenty of light, because if you went out this morning, you would have found Jupiter blazing like a star. It's 4 moons in a perfect line. And to the east, Sirius, which is like, they're celebrating Bastille Day there every morning. You know, if you want to get up and see it, just like yellow and red flashes. Well, I get a little, I get that my perceptions rise if you don't turn the lights on. So I think that, you know, there's plenty of light out there. And it's like, how many people have even thought that, that these things, that there's so much going on. And the same thing happens with all the creatures too. For example, we have a little family now of cardinals, and, you know, they have all these different little routines about feeding their kids. And then sometimes the gardener will like defend while the kids, like, he gives them a try to try and forage themselves. You know, it's like a whole operation going on. And then, like, a couple months back, they also like dug up the earth because they had to fix some tubing or something. And then later, some mushrooms that I had never seen grew. I wrote their name down, but I don't recall it off the top of my head. Unfortunately, it has like a horrible name. But it's like, wherever you are, there's stuff going on you cannot even imagine. I mean, I think they call it like dog poop mushrooms or something. Do you guys know about these things? Mm-hmm. I prefer to call them lumps of soil mushrooms. It's just much more dignified and, you know, gives them much more credit. Because who would have thought, you know, there's all this putrid, I mean, the subsoil, and it's not really good soil in that area. And they pull it up, and these little guys are like spores floating around the universe. And they go, yeah, Lyle Knob, look at that spot. You know, and they come in, and then they grow these like little clumps, and they're so beautiful. And I touched one accidentally, not thinking it was any kind of dog poop, thinking it was a lump of soil. Yeah, you know it. And it like explodes into spores. And I'm like, you know, who's not going to like go mad with the universe, you know? So then you're suddenly thinking, yeah, Walt Whitman, you know, William Bartram, you know, I get it. You know what I mean? So that's, I'd say that's part of the process. Hey, he knows the mushrooms.
It is so dense with experience and language. I mean, to me, it's psychedelic, really. It's at the same time, it feels like this incredible lamentation about our current place in time in the universe. Simultaneously, it feels like absolute celebration of the biodiversity that we have, the history that we have here, and put a tab of acid in the middle of all that and trip on all that, and that's what that book is to me. It feels like this great psychedelic moment in our history here that you've captured in such a way that I'm sorry if you haven't read this book. I'm having to have my own moment with Loss here to get to talk to him about this book, because it's the kind of book that you can just kind of drop into. Is what someone who recently read parts of this told me that was their experience of the book. Maybe it was Angela. You know, it's the kind of book that you can just kind of open up to a page, you know, and start reading it and going, wow, it's great. I mean, I could have left off from 40 pages ago and picked up right there, and it would still be going in the same place and direction. So I think what I'm most amazed about is, like, you've done this over a fairly short period of time, right? But you've obviously spent a tremendous amount of time in a quiet place to have these moments, I think, that allowed you to write the way that you've written. I can't imagine, you know, I really can't, because as a somewhat a type of writer who rushes for time to write, I feel like you've really just taken the time to write.
Yeah, I think so. One thing on the psychedelic thing, which is what all those psychedelic people in the 60s got wrong. I mean, you're a super perceptive reader, so I'm really grateful to be able to speak with you. But what they got wrong is they thought there were shortcuts, which is like a truly American consumerist way to proceed. So the fact is there's no shortcuts. And to me, and it varies for every person, so I can't see what works for anybody else. But for me, it's like a sort of like absolute cleansing of your perception in order to get to that same point in a certain way, because you just become so aware that there's so much going on. And for me, it comes through discipline. Like I say, it's like not easy to get up early every day. Actually, you're like a rebel from society, and then work until, I don't know, midday or something like that, and then do the explorations and hiking and field work, and then there's dinner and that kind of stuff, and then there's fighting to stay awake for a couple of hours before you start over again. But through the whole process, you get to a point where you start to understand just one or two things, and that's all it takes,
That's an interesting point. I wonder, was there a point where, I mean, you obviously had to, just put pen to paper and start writing this book. And did the process unfold for you? Or did you actually, at one point, was there a breakthrough moment where you went, wow, this is how this is going to go, and I can just keep writing like this? Because it seems like there's just an absolute trajectory throughout this that you just stayed on a path with.
I don't know. I think it's like what they call being in the zone. Sort of. It's like you sort of find just like a place that works, and you just like keep at it. Although this is more than 100 revisions. So I began. It was always been a poem, and it's always been about how amazing, how transformative this place is. And so there's a couple of other levels going on, but it's always been how transformative this place is. And then, so involved in, researching history and all the wildlife, all the creatures, all those psychedelic hallucinations of Bartram, you look at any of those drawings. I mean, they could be, Thomas de Quincey, and you know what I mean? And which is like, tells you that what we see is a sort of standardization of the flexibility of what's actually there. And actually, the Buddhists say that if you don't, whatever you see is you. It's not even there. Because, for example, if you see a bird singing, that you are that bird singing. Because that bird may be, having an argument with its bird spouse, you know what I mean? Or that bird may be like, telling some other bird, get that, get away from
violent.
Here,
Yeah.
Or, so there's a million possibilities. So when you think, oh, how sweet the bird is singing, that's like you are the bird, because you're like just like entering that sort of space, and it's becoming part of you, and you're becoming part of it. So I think, so what that leads to is a sort of kind of beginning to feel with a dissolution of the ego, or that sort of I, which, again, in Bartram's case, there's no one so empathetic in that vein of thinking. I mean, and so it's also a practice of, it's not like it's humility, but the second that you start to be able to accept that it's not just you against the world, then you and the world are just as one wonderful fireball. And that's why, like, you can start to really see those 4 moons of Jupiter line up. So I think, so then I use this, oh yeah, you had mentioned to me in one email about that heart spirit. And so there's this word that's like, so what you end up with is once you realize that you're in relation to everything else, absolute Bartram, in relation to everything else you exist, then you actually find out that you're here. That's where you're here. And so what I love about the word here is, if you're here, it's like, it's really all is cool. Like you're here. That's what, I mean, that's like, that's it, man.
Right.
That's the whole, that little word is,
right.
And it's here. It is here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's what I love about the heart spirit landscape, and the transparent mountain fits into this too. But the heart spirit landscape is in Japanese. There's shinsu is the word for heart. There's 2 words for heart. Shinsu, which is like this organ, which, thank you, dude, because I should never have got it. Why this thing keeps pumping? I mean, it's like, been at least 25 years or 30 years. Just kidding. That, this thing has like been going and going and going. It's like, the Energizer Bunny, but keep going, keep it up, So that's a shinzu, which is like, and if you look at the Japanese symbol for it, it's like this like massive things with all these things coming out. Because it's like just this organ with all these like wires, And then they have another one, which is another word for heart, which is called kokoro. And kokoro means more like, in my heart, I love nature, right? It's like not in your organ, in your
emotional.
Spirit, mind, soul, whatever, heart. So, so that's what I like about heart spirit landscape, because it brings. No, they're not places near here. We are here. See, it knows we're here, right?
Siri heard that.
Yeah. So the lovely thing is kokoro, which is the heart, spirit, mind, has in it the word koko, which is here. So I just love that, because the here is where the heart is. Well, not to get maudlin, but I wish I would have made up that saying.
It makes me think, and I won't diverge too much, but it made me think when you're just like, well, you're here now. You're just here. That's all there is. And
but if there is, it opens up all time.
Yeah, it opens everything.
No. You have you're there with with the telescope. See, you're there in the past 13 billion years ago.
Right. Right. Yeah. But just Eckhart Tolle once talking about Eckhart Tolle was with a person who had gone to one of his seminars, and he kept saying that, he's just complaining like, my wife's leaving me and my business has failed and I'm filing for bankruptcy, and and Eckhart Tolle was like, well, how are you doing right now though? And he's like, well, I just told you, like my whole life's falling apart. And he's like, but how are you doing right now? And he just had to keep pushing him until he got to the point like, well, how are you doing right now in this moment? How are you doing? He's like, he finally had to go, well, I'm okay. I'm full of food and, breathing good air, and, it's like, I'm right here. So I think that's the message with that somewhat.
Yeah. There's people who make millions of dollars
Teaching
telling
people.
that they're called therapists.
Oh yeah, they've got some of my money.
But I did put this line in here. I keep losing. Oh yeah, right. I said this little sort of documentary piece. In some, it's all being here in this moment, aware of all the activity around me. Whether it's a crazed ant going around in circles looking for the door, who you finally must catch and take outside, or symphonies of night insects, or just being still enough so that the resident birds begin to trust you and accept you just a little bit into their fold. When you take your time, there is always time.
Would you like to read another selection?
Okay. What is our topic? I think we.
I'll pick one for you. I don't know. I'll pick a reading for you.
Anything you like.
Really?
Sure.
Okay.
I read the book. This is like the one test I'm getting prepared for. One test in all my life I've been prepared for.
Wow. Now this is putting me on the spot. I think that page 60 kind of gets at a lot of what you've just been saying. Yeah, do you want to read maybe page 60? Or maybe, I don't know if you want to include the lines before the line breaks, but I love that. You just got this pretty much what you just were referencing at first.
Are you going to touch on the shapes that he makes with the typeset?
We definitely could, or we could save that for you to answer, ask a question about here in the Q&A. That'd be good.
60, which sections?
Just maybe starting with the top. There's a tab there at the top. Maybe starting with here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I call them dots.
Dots. Yeah.
I don't know. They must have a word, though.
Dots.
It is in that surge you find a connection. When you let go of your mind, you realize mind. It is a place inside where you sit quietly, even breath, full, still finding the midpoint between longings and profound remorse. You see yourself as if from afar. You watch as for 10,000 years. You see, yours are just like all the molecules. Here is the place that you are.
Can you read the rest?
Okay. This piece.
Yeah.
In the world out there, this point is a nearly ironic inversion of logic. It is perceptible only in peripheral vision. It is the dappled flanks of the Appaloosa, lying in the leafy Little T River birch shade, relaxed at the declivity of the tumulus' swell, or a mound beyond spikelets of moonlit sedge. It is songbirds who, after a time, recognize you, admit you into their tribe, incorporating you into their vigorous, collective, cerebral circle.
That's great. Can I keep asking you to read stuff?
Sure. like you say, I can read anywhere. I mean,
You're here.
yeah, the book lends itself to that. Really, that's a nice observation.
I like that. Maybe on page 7, actually, closer to the beginning, you reference Bartram there. Going into mountains and rivers poetry, and I like what you're reading. I mean, you don't have to go all the way from the previous page, but I love what you say about mountains and rivers poetry. There is not nature poetry, and nature being a setting for human issues, but wilderness poetry.
Yeah.
Spiritual relationship to wildness is what you get at. Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, Bartram. And then the next section after that, at the dot.
Yeah, after the dot.
Yeah, horizon of transparent mountains. Did you read that?
Yeah, and one thing, on the nature poetry angle, there's another line that's related, which is, at some point I mentioned that nature is not a place you visit. It's what you are. It's outside you and inside you, which relates to this. But it's not somewhere you go to visit. Nature is home. And that's why we're here. This is home. So you start, so I can start with Turtle Girl, just 4 lines on page 6. Who Turtle Girl, there's a Turtle Girl in the book who is a girl, our granddaughter, our grandchild, she's called. And she actually, so, if we go ahead and agree, that time is negotiable. So that in a certain way, I mean, she's here in the present, et cetera, but she's also the future. I mean, that's the thing if you watch anything about the elections or something, the young vote or whatever, it's not like they're interested in politics. It's like they have to live on the planet later, you know what I mean? So Turtle Girl is like a visitor from the future who's actually teaching the characters in the poem. Just by being, there's an example of like other things you see. And this happens to anyone who has a grandchild or a child that's young and they spend all day looking at a single rock or something. And then later you realize, so then there's also a Cherokee Gigao who is sort of a tie to the past. So these are just ties to the future and ties to the past, which that will come up later, hopefully. Lucid at Three Tribes Place, which is just a point on the little T on the Tennessee River, Little Tennessee River. Lucid at Three Tribes Place. Turtle Girl, our grandchild of the Turtle Clan. Intrepid Daxi child who pilgrimaged here to see the world before we despoil it. She is mind itself, of water, its lustrous undulations, empty awareness. As poetry of the numinous realm, a tradition stretching over millennia. Mountains and rivers poetry, not nature poetry, nature as a setting for human issues, but wilderness poetry, invoking their spiritual relation to wildness. Here, Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, Muir. Bartram, Forbes, Woolf through ecopoetry, embracing the wild as kin, in cordilleras of Taoist and Buddhist philosophy, shaping landscape into forms of understanding. Horizon of transparent mountain, Carolina parakeets, the red wolf's elusive breath. All living things make up the Lakota Sioux's Wemitali, the all-where, in which all of nature is in all of nature is in us. All of us is in nature. Counter to the European garde lo ethos, outside being where you throw your feces. Castle moats also served as open sewers. Remember that when next time you visit a charming castle. Wilderness being the other, a place for heathenism and superstitious rites to be inhabited by men nearer of kin to the rocks and to wild animals than we are. By contrast, for the Cherokee, nature's unfathomable spirit, its otherness is sacred. Breezes spiral ambrosially, evolutions, migrations, ebb concentric wavelets of awareness, stones dropped into a pool of imagination. Musings are silica bedrock, intensely solid, but on a molecular level, a mist, mostly empty. All is diaphanous folded swell. Steep gradients propel terracotta streams hurling through blue mist. Shakonahay, Cherokee for land of blue smoke, it's often said, but perhaps better is Sagonagay, simply blue, precise, subtle, more poetic. The way the evocative language of Bartram's travels inspired his own circle, scientists, British romantic poets, ecologists, eco-poets, naturalists alike. nested in the curls of the southern Appalachians, the confluence of the Uwharrie, Nantahala, Pisgah, Cherokee, and Smokies forest, mind fluxes, poetic.
It's wonderful. You mentioned Bartram throughout the book, and you mentioned Bartram today. I just can't help but read this and think about Bartram pretty much throughout it. I think it captures the spirit of Bartram so well, and the writing. His writing is such a poetic rendering of landscape and epiphanous, poetic. Did Bartram kind of infuse this for you somewhat in a way that is more profound than we can see necessarily? Or I guess what role was? I mean, so many people were important in this book. I feel like. Was Bartram a fairly significant influence for you here on the landscape?
Yeah, the most significant, and will also be and more so. There's more so in the next book too. I think that Bartram. So one thing Bartram did was to prove that besides being I consider him, I say Bartram was not just a botanist, but importantly, a poet naturalist. He not only looks, but he sees. Bartram is a writer who presented a theory of nature based upon scientific study. One of the most striking elements of this doctrine is that consciousness is attributed not only to some abstract deity called nature, but to all living things, notably vegetation, and I would argue, and the connections between them. And a quote from Bartram is one quote is, "Can we, after viewing this object, hesitate a moment to confess that vegetable beings," and notice he even calls them beings, "are endued with some sensible facilities or attributes similar to those that dignify animal nature. They are organical, living, and self-moving bodies. For here we see in this plant motion and volition." So Bartram manifests and has shown that we are surrounded by more life than the imagination can even embrace. For example, when you're swimming and you get close to a bluet, and you linger without moving, watching his eyes, they're completely sentient. The being sits completely sentient. Not only that, they're aware, and they see 360 degrees, which you can't even do. These are things you perceive when you allow your senses to be more receptive. It is life beyond the perceptible. The earth is alive. You see it. It sees you from thousands of angles. It is what you see, your sight, but it is equally you. The landscape is seen not only with the eyes, but with the heart, because, and I think that that's where elsewhere I say that, so Bartram understood Kokoro. The idea of Kokoro, that it's not the trees and the rocks and that, which, some of those northerners that I mentioned in the first part of that stanza would perhaps lean to. Although they would even Thoreau, they're sort of like, wow, look at those pines. Let's see, calculate how much that. Mm-hmm. So, but Bartram was much more seeing things with Kokoro. And I say, the heart-spirit landscape is what you see when you look at the landscape, and what you see is more than trees, mountains, and sky. It is how it all comes together in a way that you feel deeply inside. It is an awareness of your place in it. And like I said before, I like that Coco, or here, is in the word Kokoro. Yes, you too are the heart-spirit landscape. All of you, you too are here. With Kokoro, what Bartram saw, even though not the same forest, is still visible today. That's super important. It's still visible today, exactly what he saw. It is the heart spirit landscape. Indeed, Bartram is still here.
I think what you said is so interesting about those other American icons of nature, Emerson and Thoreau and Burroughs and Muir and others, that it seems like Bartram was on a different trajectory with nature in this country. And that's a path this country could have taken, you know? And instead it was just the version of nature that we got was very much Emersonian, and I think directly from Thoreau and Muir and others. And it was nature as other. And I don't think with Bartram, that it was nature as other. I think it was nature as us. We are nature. And that was a very different path that I think American nature appreciation could have gone, but we chose the Emersonian route. And I think part of that, maybe just a book I've been reading about Tyler Green, is that just this Emerson was writing in a sanitized landscape, more or less. Native people have been removed, forests have been cleared. It was a very pastoral landscape, I think, that Emerson was appreciating as nature. And I think if this country had taken Bartram seriously and then pursued that path of Bartram appreciation of the American landscape, starting in 1775, we might have had a different outcome. We might have had less suffering. There could have been a different planet here anyway. Maybe.
Yeah, could have been. And remember, he was writing in the height of the American Revolution, which shows even much more character on his part.
Yeah. Never mentions
he just
it
blocked
one time.
it out. Yeah,
Never
he just
mentions
blocked
it one
it out.
time.
It was like he was just here. You know what I mean? But I mean, it's kind of like you could say the same thing. Like I remember in the 70s, all university students knew about ecology. All university students knew that you couldn't contaminate the earth anymore. I mean, hip university students. But I mean, a lot of in the universities, it was common knowledge that there were suddenly ecology departments, suddenly, a new appreciation for the environment, and nothing happened. 50 years, nothing happened.
Yeah.
And what happened in 50 years? They accelerated, So
we recycled, we brought our own shopping bags, everything.
Yeah.
But we probably ought to stop and let some folks answer questions. I don't want to keep you too long past the scheduled time. Did you have anything else you wanted to share or read before we open it up?
I might just do one thing here. Let me see if there was one thing I thought would be kind of, fun to read. Which is not very long. We have time to do,
Sure.
And then we have questions for sure. When you close I'm on page 105. When you close your eyes, you are riding a narrow trail across Nantahala's steep forest slope. The pitch is so extreme, gnarled roots seem all that hold massive rocks in place. Sharp horse hoof jolts pound deep into wet earth. Each step stops your plummeting into the churning river below. The sound of horsemen nears. You yield the trail to Atakulakula astride his steed. He welcomes you as you follow William Bartram through the woods. Atakulakula, Cherokee, first beloved man, of small stature, astute, mature, notably wise. The horse is not just any horse. This is Buffalo Bill's White Horse Brigham, or Neruda's Honey Amber Fire, or one of Malapart's horses who fled fire plunging into icy Lake Ladoga to freeze solid, or Supervier's horse, mane wet, vowing one day to rejoin the sea's rolling waves. Thrums of the horse's heart so orotund, they echo deep inside you. This one horse, as all horses, are the true pioneers of America. his ethereal meadow flower breath as you greet him by inhalations, his meteoric snorts as he anabases. O horse of Atakulakula! We go on traversing parterres, vistas, and verdant swelling knolls. The strong current of the Tennessee gives up a crossing. Climbing the bank on the other side, you are wondrously absorbed in the vibrant scarlet of ambrosial strawberries. They tint the horses' hooves and ankles of the hooves and ankles of the untethered horses, now allowed repose. You recline next to Bartram in a meadow, eat ripe Indian strawberries. Nearby, splendid Melagris wild turkeys and capricious roebucks meander tranquilly as you savor sun-warm fruit under radiant cerulean contemplation crisp skies. Suddenly, the warm flavor still lingering on your lips, you are violently seized and hauled back to the asylum. Not trusted at the inland facility, you are transferred to the annex at the Niobraran Sea. You amble out a side door into monstrous curling waves where you settle into profound concentration, deep in the ocean where no eye endures. Only focused concentration, intense calm, soundless states of being. You explore non-thinking, wandering among modes of thought you never fully entered before. You wander royal palms, immense ancient banyan tree groves, and explore hectares of whimsical rocks. Violently, the nurse yanks you from the surf, thudding convulsive gasps. What are you doing, he growls. I sojourned in Bartram's wild meadow, you utter. The Milky Way has vanished. Trees are made of thin air. The forest is synecdochic. But imagine, Island Knob is still a whirl of stars. Breath itself. He scowls at you, irritated at having to save an incoherent lunatic. His anger doesn't vex you, accustomed to people who have lost all sense of decorum. You look down astonished at your legs, fragrant, dyed red from the sea.
That's amazing.